The file was stamped top secret in 1945. When it was finally declassified, Americans discovered their space program was built by the same men who designed Hitler's death camps. This is the story of Operation Paperclip, the most controversial recruitment program in American history. In May 1945, as Allied forces swept through the ruins of Nazi Germany, American intelligence officers made a discovery that would change the course of history. Hidden in a mine shaft in the Harz Mountains, they found something extraordinary: 14 tons of documents detailing the Third Reich's most advanced weapons programs. But the real treasure wasn't the papers, it was the men who created them. Major Robert Staver of the U.S. Army Ordnance Corps was leading a special mission. While other units liberated concentration camps and captured Nazi leadership, Staver's team had different orders. They were hunting scientists. His superiors in Washington had given him a list of names, German researchers whose knowledge could determine who would dominate the post-war world. Wait until you hear what these scientists were doing just months before. The team that discovered these documents was part of a secret unit called T-Force Target Force. Their mission wasn't to capture territory or liberate camps. They were part of Operation Alsos, the Allied effort to capture German nuclear scientists before the Soviets could reach them. But what they found went far beyond atomic research. In a salt mine near Nordhausen, Staver's men discovered something that made their blood run cold. Not just rocket blueprints, but production records. Records that showed exactly how Germany's wonder weapons were built, with slave labor from the concentration camp next door. Staver's list contained names that would later become legends of the American space program. But in 1945, these same names appeared on a very different list, one maintained by the Nuremberg prosecutors. Men like Werner von Braun, Arthur Rudolph, and Kurt Debus weren't just scientists. They were SS officers. The man at the top of Staver's list was Werner von Braun. Charming, brilliant, and just 33 years old, von Braun had designed the V-2 rocket that terrorized London. What the American public wouldn't learn for decades was that von Braun's rockets were built by slave labor from the Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp. Let me paint you a picture of Mittelbau-Dora that the NASA biographies leave out. Prisoners worked 12-hour shifts in underground tunnels with no ventilation. They slept in the same tunnels on wooden planks stacked 4 high. No sunlight, no fresh air. The dust from drilling mixed with human waste. Tuberculosis spread like wildfire. The average life expectancy, 6 months. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. 20,000 prisoners died building von Braun's rockets. More people died making the V-2 than were killed by it. Survivors testified about von Braun personally selecting prisoners from Buchenwald. He wore his SS uniform to the selection. One survivor, Adam Kabala, remembered von Braun examining prisoners' teeth like they were horses at auction. Von Braun held the rank of Sturmbannführer in the SS, equivalent to a major. This wasn't honorary. He attended meetings where they discussed disposing of prisoners who were too weak to work. Documents show he recommended hangings for suspected saboteurs. Yet by September 1945, von Braun was living comfortably at Fort Bliss, Texas, teaching American engineers how to build rockets. How did a man who should have faced trial at Nuremberg end up with a NASA badge? The answer lay in a file marked Operation Overcast, later renamed Operation Paperclip, because paperclips were used to attach the scientists' new biographies to their personnel files. The operation was supposed to have limits. President Truman's directive was clear: no ardent Nazis would be admitted to America. The order specifically excluded anyone who was a member of the Nazi Party and more than a nominal participant in its activities, or an active supporter of Nazi militarism. But the definition of ardent Nazi became surprisingly flexible when national security was invoked. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIO, found a simple solution. They rewrote the scientists' biographies. Annie Jacobsen, who spent years investigating classified paperclip files, discovered the systematic falsification of backgrounds. SS membership, erased. War crimes, classified. Nazi party leadership, rewritten as forced participation. The military created what they called false biographies, sanitized versions of the scientists' wartime activities. The most shocking part, they didn't even hide it well. Take the case of Dr. Hubertus Strughold, later known as the father of space medicine. His file showed he attended a 1942 conference at Dachau, where Nazi doctors discussed freezing experiments on humans. The victims were dunked in ice water to see how long Luftwaffe pilots could survive in the North Sea. Some subjects had their body temperature lowered to 79 degrees Fahrenheit. They died in agony while doctors took notes. Strughold claimed he was appalled by these experiments, but conference records show he suggested improvements to the methodology. He wanted to use electrodes to monitor brain activity as victims froze to death. When confronted years later, the Air Force claimed they hadn't properly vetted Strughold, but declassified memos show they knew exactly who he was. Colonel Donald Putt wrote in 1945, "His knowledge of aviation medicine is greater than any individual in this field. He should be brought to the U.S. without delay." A handwritten note in the margin adds, "Agree, his knowledge is worth more than his past." The State Department's Samuel Klaus tried to stop it. He wrote memo after memo warning about admitting war criminals. In 1946, he stated, "These scientists have been screened by professional screeners who have had no training in security procedures. Their screening consists solely of extracting a pledge of loyalty to the United States." Klaus was ignored. Worse, he was investigated for communist sympathies and forced to resign. Why take such enormous moral risks? The answer was flying over America's heads at 17,000 mph, Sputnik. But the competition for German scientists began long before the space race. The Soviets had their own version of paperclip called Operation Paperclip. On October 22, 1946, they executed it with brutal efficiency. In a single night, Soviet forces rounded up 2,200 German specialists and their families, over 6,000 people total. They were given 2 hours to pack and loaded onto trains heading east. America's intelligence community was terrified of falling behind. A 1947 War Department memo stated, "If German scientists are not employed by us, they will certainly be employed by the Soviets." Denial of these scientists to the USSR is more important than moral considerations. But the real shock was who was protecting these scientists. CIA Director Allen Dulles personally intervened to protect paperclip scientists from war crimes investigators. When the Dora Nordhausen trial threatened to expose von Braun's role, Dulles made sure key witnesses disappeared. One survivor, Jean Mitchell, had testified about von Braun selecting prisoners. Mitchell was a French resistance hero who survived 2 years at Dora. He had documented evidence of von Braun's visits to the tunnels, including dates and times. Suddenly, Mitchell's visa to testify in America was denied. The State Department claimed it was a paperwork error. It wasn't just Dulles. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI actively helped falsify immigration documents. When the Immigration and Naturalization Service raised concerns about admitting Nazis, Hoover created a new security clearance just for paperclip scientists. It was so secret that even immigration officials weren't allowed to see the actual background checks. General Leslie Groves, who ran the Manhattan Project, was equally complicit. He argued that German scientists were essential for America's atomic program. When reports surfaced that some of these scientists had experimented on human subjects, Groves classified the reports for 50 years. By 1969, von Braun was an American hero. The Saturn V rocket that carried Apollo 11 was his design. When Armstrong and Aldrin planted the American flag on the moon, von Braun stood in mission control, tears in his eyes. President Nixon called him one of the greatest scientists of our time. Nobody mentioned the other tears, those of the slaves who died in the tunnels of Mittelbau-Dora. Nobody talked about how von Braun's mentor, Walter Dornberger, had used Russian POWs for target practice to test the accuracy of V-2 explosions. The transformation was complete. SS Sturmbannführer Werner von Braun had become Dr. Werner von Braun, director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. His salary was $35,000 a year, roughly $300,000 in today's money. He lived in a beautiful home in Huntsville, Alabama, where he was treated like royalty. What happened next will make you question everything. In 1984, Arthur Rudolph faced a choice. The Office of Special Investigations had finally caught up with him. For 40 years, he'd been living as an American hero, designer of the Saturn V's propulsion system, winner of NASA's highest honors. But investigators had proof of his role at Mittelbau-Dora. Rudolph had been production manager of the V-2 facility. Survivors testified that he personally ordered hangings. One prisoner, Frederick Ordway, described how Rudolph selected workers he deemed inefficient for execution. Their bodies were left hanging in the tunnels as a warning to others. Rather than face denaturalization proceedings, Rudolph fled to West Germany and renounced his U.S. citizenship. NASA called it unfortunate. They didn't return his medals. But here's what the public didn't know. The Justice Department had this information since 1945. An Army intelligence report from that year stated, Rudolph exploited slave labor for V-2 production. He is an ardent Nazi. They waited until he was no longer useful to act on it. Linda Hunt was a CNN investigator in 1985 when she made a discovery that would consume the next decade of her life. While researching in the National Archives, she found boxes labeled Operation Paperclip that were supposed to be classified until 2045. A clerk's mistake had released them 60 years early. What she found rewrote history. The official story was that 350 scientists were brought to America. The real number, at least 1,600, and they weren't all rocket scientists. These documents revealed something nobody expected. The files contained names that shocked even hardened investigators. Kurt Blome, head of Nazi biological warfare research, experimented with plague vaccines on concentration camp prisoners, infected Polish prisoners with tuberculosis to test treatments, acquitted at Nuremberg due to lack of evidence that American intelligence had hidden. By 1951, he was working at Camp King, Maryland, for the U.S. Army Chemical Corps. Major General Walter Schraber, Surgeon General of the Third Reich, oversaw freezing experiments, high-altitude experiments, and malaria research on humans. When his past threatened to surface in 1952, the CIA relocated him to Argentina with a new identity. Otto Ambros, co-discoverer of sarin gas, director of IG Farben's Auschwitz plant, which used 30,000 slave laborers. His plant produced Zyklon B, the gas used in the death chambers. Convicted at Nuremberg, served 3 years. Upon release, the U.S. Army hired him as a consultant. Dow Chemical paid him $3,000 a month. W.R. Grace and Company put him on their board. One document Hunt found was particularly damning. It was a 1947 memo from JIOA Director Bosque Webb. The best interests of the United States have been subjugated to the efforts expended in beating a dead Nazi horse. Hunt's research revealed an entire infrastructure dedicated to protecting war criminals. When news of their past threatened to surface, they were given new identities, relocated, or suddenly developed health problems that prevented testimony. Not everyone stayed silent. Throughout Paperclip's operation, there were those who tried to expose the truth. Dr. Georg Ricke was one of the few Paperclip scientists actually sent back to Germany to face trial. As general manager of Mittelbau-Dora's V-2 production, He was charged with war crimes, but in a twist that shocked prosecutors, he was acquitted after key witnesses mysteriously became unavailable. Years later, investigators discovered that the U.S. military had hidden exculpatory evidence to ensure his acquittal. They wanted him back. State Department Representative Samuel Klaus became Paperclip's most persistent opponent. His 1946 memo remains one of the most damning indictments of the program. We have been deceiving the American people by admitting persons who were not screened as the president directed. Furthermore, we are admitting SS members who were active in Nazi murder programs. Klaus documented how the military deliberately delayed background checks until after the scientists were already in America. By then, they argued, it would be too dangerous to send them back. The Soviets might get them. Then came the revelation that changed everything. In 2006, the National Archives declassified the last batch of Paperclip employment records. They revealed that NASA, the CIA, and the Army had actively recruited scientists they knew were war criminals. One document explicitly stated, past Nazi activities should not disqualify personnel if their skills are sufficiently important to the national defense. The files also revealed Project 63, a subset of Paperclip focused on chemical weapons experts. These scientists weren't just theorists. They had tested nerve agents on prisoners. One report describes experiments at Natzwiller concentration camp, where prisoners were exposed to phosgene and mustard gas to test protective clothing. The scientists measured how long it took victims to die. By 1950, these same scientists were developing America's chemical weapons arsenal at Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland. They were given security clearances, comfortable homes, and their children attended American schools. Meanwhile, their victims' families were still searching for bodies. Today, if you visit Huntsville, Alabama, Rocket City, USA, you'll find monuments to the German rocket team. The U.S. Space and Rocket Center features a prominent exhibit on von Braun. Tour guides speak reverently about his genius. There's no mention of Mittelbau-Dora, no recognition of the 20,000 who died building his rockets. At Kennedy Space Center, the Dr. Kurt H. Debus Conference Center honors another SS member who became NASA royalty. Debus had been an active Nazi Party member since 1939 and an SS officer during the war. Tourists take selfies in the building, unaware they're standing in a monument to a man who wore the Death's Head insignia. The whitewashing extends to our educational system. American textbooks celebrate von Braun as the father of the space program. They might mention he worked for Germany during World War II, but rarely elaborate. An entire generation learned to admire Nazi war criminals without knowing it. But the most disturbing part is what we're still not being told. In 2019, the CIA admitted that thousands of Paperclip-related documents remain classified. National security, they claim, even though the last known Paperclip scientist died in 2003. What could possibly still be secret? Researchers have theories. Some believe the documents detail human experimentation that continued in America. Others think they reveal the true extent of the program, that far more than 1,600 scientists were brought over, including some whose crimes were too heinous to ever acknowledge. There's evidence for both theories. In the 1970s, congressional investigations revealed CIA programs like MK-Ultra that used unwitting American citizens as test subjects. The methods drugs, sensory deprivation, psychological torture bore striking similarities to Nazi research. Many MK-Ultra researchers had connections to Paperclip scientists. Was it worth it? That's the question historians still debate. America won the space race. The Saturn V remains humanity's greatest engineering achievement. Nuclear deterrence possibly prevented World War III. But at what cost to our moral authority? When we recruited Nazi scientists, we didn't just gain their knowledge, we inherited their methods. The same CIA that protected war criminals would later conduct its own human experiments. The precedent was set. Science trumps morality when national security is at stake. Dr. Eli Rosenbaum, who led the Justice Department's Nazi hunting unit, put it bluntly, "We traded justice for rockets. We gave war criminals a pass because we decided their knowledge was more important than their victims' lives." The trade-offs go deeper than individual choices. Operation Paperclip established a pattern that would define American intelligence operations for decades. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, regardless of their crimes. National security justifies any moral compromise. Classification can hide any embarrassment. Success excuses any method. From recruiting Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, to fight communism, to training death squads in Central America, to enhanced interrogation at Guantanamo, the moral flexibility of Paperclip became embedded in our institutions. Fred Ordway spent 2 years in Middle Baldora. In 1995, on the 50th anniversary of liberation, he returned to the tunnels with a CBS News crew. Standing where he once assembled V2 components as a slave, he said something that haunts me. Von Braun came through here in his black SS uniform. He'd point at prisoners who looked weak and they'd disappear. We all knew him. After the war, I saw him on TV shaking hands with President Kennedy. I threw up. Ordway spent decades trying to get American media to tell his story. Most refused. When von Braun died in 1977, Walter Cronkite called him, a man who turned the dream of space travel into reality. No mention of the nightmares in the tunnels. Alex Baum, another survivor, attempted suicide when he saw von Braun on the cover of Time magazine in 1958. "They made him a hero," Baum said. "What about us? What about the ones who didn't make it out of those tunnels?" Here's what will really make your blood boil. In 1969, as Apollo 11 approached the moon, a group of Dora survivors wrote to the New York Times. They wanted the world to know the truth about the men behind the mission. The letter was never published. An editor later admitted they didn't want to diminish the achievement. Think about that. American media actively suppressed survivor testimony to protect the feel-good narrative of the moon landing. The truth was literally buried to preserve the lie. Let me read you directly from some of these declassified documents. This is from von Braun's SS file, translated from German. SS Sturmbannführer von Braun has shown exceptional dedication to the Reich's military goals. His work at Peenemünde and implementation of production at Mittelwerk demonstrate proper National Socialist thinking. He has shown no reluctance in utilizing available labor resources to meet production targets. Available labor resources meant slaves. Proper National Socialist thinking meant he was a true believer. Here's another, from a 1945 U.S. Army intelligence report on Arthur Rudolph. Subject has been described by prisoners as brutal and sadistic. He has been identified by multiple witnesses as personally selecting prisoners for hanging. One witness states subject beat a prisoner to death with a rubber hose for supposed sabotage. Recommend detention and investigation for war crimes. Instead of detention, Rudolph got a house in Huntsville and a key role in the Apollo program. One more, this is from a JIOA memo discussing how to handle the scientist's pasts. It is advised that all mentions of subjects' political activities, including SS membership, be removed from official biographies. Emphasize technical achievements only. If questioned about wartime activities, subjects should state they were focused solely on research and unaware of labor conditions. They literally provided a script for war criminals to recite. Operation Paperclip didn't end in 1959. Its philosophy continues today. Every time we debate whether to use information obtained through torture, we're having the paperclip conversation. Every time we hire hackers who have committed crimes, we're following the paperclip playbook. In 2014, the CIA admitted to recruiting former members of Saddam Hussein's intelligence services. Men who had tortured dissidents were now on American payroll, helping fight ISIS. The justification: their knowledge of local networks was invaluable. And here's the kicker that nobody talks about. China is now running its own version of Paperclip, recruiting Western scientists with checkered pasts. Russia has done the same. The moral race to the bottom that America started has become global policy. We taught the world that ethics are negotiable if the prize is big enough. Operation Paperclip officially ended in 1959, but its ghosts haunt us still. Every time we celebrate American space achievements, we're also celebrating men who should have hanged at Nuremberg. The most chilling document in the Paperclip files is also the simplest. It's a 1948 memo from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In light of the Soviet threat, moral objections to recruitment must be considered secondary to national survival. Those 20 words justified everything that followed. They justified hearing men who performed medical experiments that would make Joseph Mengele proud. They justified protecting war criminals from prosecution. They justified lying to the American people for over 40 years. Today, when you look up at the moon, remember, we got there first. But we got there standing on the shoulders of monsters. And somewhere in a classified vault, there are still documents that explain exactly how many deaths we deemed acceptable for that giant leap for mankind. The Paperclip file remains open because the questions it raises can never be fully answered. When survival is at stake, what evils will we embrace? When history judges us, will our victories excuse our compromises? Perhaps the most honest assessment came from von Braun himself near the end of his life. A young engineer asked him about his time in Germany. Von Braun replied, "I aimed for the stars, but sometimes I hit London." He was talking about his V-2 rockets missing their targets, but he might as well have been talking about Operation Paperclip itself, a program that reached for scientific supremacy and hit our national conscience instead. As I close this file, one last thought. In 1985, President Reagan visited Bitburg Cemetery in Germany, where Waffen-SS members are buried. He defended the visit by saying we must put the past behind us. But how can we put the past behind us when we brought the past home with us? When we gave it security clearances, comfortable retirements, and medals of honor? The truth is, we can't close the Paperclip file because we're still living with its consequences. Every time we choose expediency over morality, every time we classify documents to hide embarrassment rather than protect security, every time we tell ourselves the ends justify the means, we're adding another page to the Paperclip file. And that file, like the questions it raises, may never close.